He was 26 years old when he realized that dreams do not pay bills. It was a hard lesson, the kind that stays with you forever, the kind that changes who you are. He had spent his whole life believing in one thing, and now that one thing felt like a distant memory. Every morning, he woke up and looked at his hands. These were the same hands that had once danced across piano keys for hours. These were the same hands that his teachers had called gifted. But now, these hands carried plates of food to strangers in a fancy restaurant. His story began like many others. He grew up in a small town where not much happened. His family was simple. His father worked in a factory, and his mother stayed home to take care of him and his two younger sisters. They did not have much money, but they had love. And that was enough for a long time. When he was 7 years old, his grandmother gave him an old keyboard. It was dusty, and some of the keys did not work properly. But to him, it was the most beautiful thing in the world. He would sit for hours, pressing the keys, listening to the sounds, imagining that he was performing in front of thousands of people. His parents noticed his love for music. They saved every extra penny they had. They skipped small pleasures so they could afford piano lessons for their son. His mother would often say that watching him play made her forget all her troubles. His father, a man of few words, would simply nod and smile whenever he heard the music coming from their small living room. They believed in him, even when he did not believe in himself. By the time he was 15, everyone in his town knew about him. He was the boy who could make a piano sing. He won local competitions. He performed at school events. Teachers told his parents that he had real talent, the kind that comes once in a generation. When he turned 18, he received a scholarship to study at a famous music school in the city. It was the happiest day of his life. He remembered his mother crying tears of joy. His father hugged him tight and whispered that he was proud. His sisters made him a card with colorful drawings of pianos and musical notes. The city was nothing like his small town. It was loud, fast, and sometimes cruel. But he did not care. He was finally living his dream. He practiced for 8 hours every day. His fingers would ache, but he never stopped. His teachers were impressed. They said he had something special, something that could not be taught. He made friends with other students who shared his passion. They would stay up late talking about music, about their dreams, about the future. He felt like he belonged somewhere for the first time in his life. 3 years passed like a beautiful song. He was getting closer to his goal. He could see his future clearly. He would graduate, perform in concerts, travel the world, and make his family proud. But life has a way of changing everything in a single moment. One evening, he received a phone call that shattered his world. His father had collapsed at work. The doctors said it was serious. His father needed surgery and months of recovery. The medical bills were more than his family could ever afford. He did not think twice. He packed his bags and went home. His mother told him not to give up his studies. His father, even from his hospital bed, said he should go back to the city. But he could not. How could he play music while his family was struggling? How could he chase his dreams while his father was fighting for his life? He was the eldest son. It was his duty to take care of them. So he dropped out of music school and started looking for work. Finding a job was harder than he thought. He had no experience in anything except playing piano, and nobody was going to pay him for that. He worked at a grocery store for a few months. Then he tried construction work, but his hands were not made for heavy labor. Finally, a friend told him about an opening at a high-end restaurant in a nearby city. They needed waiters, and the pay was decent. He applied and got the job. The restaurant was called the Grand View. It was the kind of place where rich people came to celebrate special occasions. The floors were made of marble. The chandeliers sparkled like diamonds. And in one corner of the main dining hall stood a beautiful grand piano. It was black and shiny, and it looked like it had never been played. The manager told him it was just for decoration. Something to make the place look elegant. Every time he walked past that piano, his heart ached a little. It was like seeing an old friend who no longer recognized him. His coworkers were nice enough. They did not know about his past. To them, he was just the quiet guy who showed up on time and never complained. He learned how to carry multiple plates without dropping them. He learned how to smile even when customers were rude. He learned how to be invisible, to move through the room without being noticed. It was strange how quickly he adapted to this new life. Sometimes he would catch himself humming a melody while polishing glasses, and then he would stop because it hurt too much to remember. His father eventually recovered, but the bills kept coming. His sisters were in school and they needed books and uniforms. His mother's health was also getting weaker, so he kept working. He picked up extra shifts whenever he could. He sent most of his money home and kept just enough for rent and food. His small apartment had nothing on the walls. He did not own a piano. He did not even listen to music anymore. It was easier that way. If he did not think about what he had lost, maybe it would not hurt so much. Months turned into years. He was now 26, and his dream of becoming a concert pianist felt like something from another lifetime. Sometimes, late at night, he would look at his hands and wonder what could have been. He would flex his fingers, remembering how they used to fly across the keys. He still had the skill. He could feel it inside him, waiting, hoping. But what was the point? Talent means nothing if you do not have the chance to use it. He had accepted his fate. He was a waiter now. That was his life. But deep down, somewhere in a corner of his heart that he tried to ignore, the music was still alive. It was like a small flame that refused to die, no matter how hard the wind blew. He did not know it yet, but that flame was about to grow. His story was not over. In fact, the most important chapter was just about to begin. Because sometimes life puts us exactly where we need to be, even if we cannot see it at the time. And sometimes all it takes is one moment of courage to change everything. He had no idea that such a moment was waiting for him. He had no idea that a single evening would turn his whole world upside down. All he knew was that he had to get through another shift, carry another plate, and survive another day. But fate had other plans. And fate, as they say, has a way of finding us when we least expect it. It was a Friday evening in late autumn. The leaves outside had turned golden and red, and there was a chill in the air that made people want to stay indoors. Inside the Grand View, everything was warm and bright. The staff had been preparing for this night all week. It was going to be a big event, a private booking that took over the entire main dining hall. The restaurant manager had been nervous for days. He kept checking every detail, making sure every glass was spotless, every napkin perfectly folded. This was not just any dinner. This was the rehearsal dinner for one of the wealthiest families in the city. He arrived for his shift early that evening. He put on his crisp white shirt and black vest, the same uniform he had worn 100 times before. His coworker, a young woman who had been working there for only a few months, looked excited. She whispered that the family hosting the event was very rich and very generous with tips. He just nodded. He had stopped caring about such things a long time ago. Money was money. It came and went. All he wanted was to get through the night without any problems. The guests started arriving around 7 o'clock. Expensive cars pulled up to the entrance one after another. Women in elegant dresses and men in tailored suits walked through the doors. He watched them from across the room, noting how they carried themselves with confidence. These were people who had never known struggle. They had never worried about paying bills or choosing between food and medicine. For a moment, he felt a familiar sting of bitterness. But he pushed it down. It was not their fault that his life had turned out the way it did. The bride arrived with her parents. She was young, probably in her early 20s, with soft features and kind eyes. She wore a simple blue dress that matched the color of the evening sky. He could tell she was nervous. She kept touching her hair and looking around the room as if searching for something. Her mother walked beside her, a tall woman with perfect posture and a tight smile. Her father followed behind, checking his phone every few seconds. They did not look like a happy family. There was something stiff about the way they moved together, like actors playing roles they had rehearsed too many times. A few minutes later, the groom arrived with his own parents. He was a handsome young man with broad shoulders and an easy smile. But his parents were a different story. His mother had sharp eyes that seemed to judge everything they landed on. His father had the look of a man who was used to getting his way. When the two families saw each other, the temperature in the room seemed to drop. The smiles became forced. The handshakes were brief and cold. He noticed it immediately. There was history here, and it was not good. The dinner began smoothly enough. Appetizers were served, and glasses were filled with expensive wine. But as the minutes passed, the tension grew thicker. It started with small comments, the kind that sound polite on the surface but carry poison underneath. The groom's mother made a remark about the wedding venue, suggesting it was perhaps too modest for such an important occasion. The bride's mother responded with a tight smile, saying that some people value meaning over show. The words hung in the air like smoke. He moved between tables, refilling water glasses, clearing empty plates. He had learned to be invisible in moments like this. Rich people often forgot that waiters had ears. They spoke freely, as if the staff were furniture. He heard whispers about old business deals gone wrong, about money owed and never repaid, about insults exchanged years ago that had never been forgiven. The feud between these two families ran deep, and tonight it was all bubbling to the surface. The bride sat at the center of the long table, caught between two worlds. On her left sat her parents, and on her right sat her future in-laws. She tried to keep the conversation light. She laughed at jokes that were not funny. She changed the subject whenever things got too heated. But he could see the strain in her eyes. She was exhausted, and the night had barely begun. This was supposed to be one of the happiest times of her life. Instead, she looked like she wanted to disappear. Things got worse when the main course was served. The groom's father made a comment about the bride's family business, implying that they were not as successful as they pretended to be. The bride's father put down his fork and stared across the table with barely contained anger. For a moment it looked like he might say something he would regret. But instead he simply smiled and said that success is measured in different ways. The groom's father laughed, but it was not a kind laugh. It was the laugh of a man who enjoyed making others uncomfortable. The bride's eyes began to glisten. She blinked rapidly, trying to hold back tears. Her groom reached over and held her hand under the table. He whispered something in her ear, probably telling her that everything would be okay. But even he looked defeated. This was supposed to be a celebration of their love. Instead, it had become a battlefield for their parents' old grudges. To make matters worse, the entertainment had canceled at the last minute. A jazz band had been booked to play during the dinner, to fill the silences and create a pleasant atmosphere. But they had called just an hour before the event, saying there had been a family emergency. The manager had tried to find a replacement, but it was too late. So the dining hall remained quiet, except for the clink of silverware and the occasional burst of forced laughter. The silence made everything worse. Every whispered insult, every sarcastic comment, every awkward pause was amplified. He stood near the back of the room, watching the scene unfold. He had seen difficult dinners before, but this was something else. The air felt heavy, like a storm was about to break. He looked at the bride again. A single tear had escaped and was rolling down her cheek. She wiped it away quickly, hoping no one had noticed. But he had noticed, and something inside him stirred. He did not know this girl. He would probably never see her again after tonight. But in that moment, he felt her pain as if it were his own. He thought about his own sisters, about how he would feel if someone ruined their special day. He thought about his mother, who had sacrificed so much for her children's happiness. He thought about all the people in the world who just wanted to be loved and celebrated, but instead found themselves surrounded by bitterness and conflict. It was not fair. None of it was fair. The dinner continued, but the mood only grew darker. The groom's mother made another sharp comment. The bride's mother fired back with equal venom. Guests at the other tables shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some pretended to be very interested in their food. Others stared at their phones, desperate for an escape. The groom tried to change the subject by talking about the honeymoon they had planned. But nobody was listening. The two families were too busy fighting a war that had nothing to do with the young couple. Caught in the middle, he looked at the grand piano sitting silently in the corner. It was still beautiful, still untouched, still waiting. For 3 years he had walked past it every single day. For 3 years he had ignored the longing in his heart. But tonight, something felt different. The piano seemed to be calling to him, as if it knew what he was capable of, as if it was asking him to remember who he used to be. He shook his head and looked away. No, he told himself. That part of his life was over. He was just a waiter now. His job was to serve food and stay out of the way. But as he watched the bride struggle to hold herself together, as he felt the weight of all that sadness and anger in the room, a thought crept into his mind. What if he could do something? What if just for one moment he could change the atmosphere? What if the music that still lived inside him could make a difference? It was a crazy idea. He would probably get fired. His manager would be furious. The guests might think he had lost his mind. But as he stood there in the shadows, watching a young woman's heart break on what should have been a beautiful night, he realized that some things are more important than playing it safe. Some moments call for courage, even when courage feels impossible. He did not make a decision yet, but something had shifted inside him. The small flame that had been hiding in his heart for so long was starting to flicker. And soon, very soon, it would demand to be seen. The tension in the room had reached a breaking point. He could feel it in the air, thick and heavy like the moments before a thunderstorm. The bride's father had just made a cutting remark about the groom's family, something about how money cannot buy class. The groom's mother had responded with a cold smile and words that were even sharper. Now, both families sat in icy silence, staring at their plates, refusing to look at each other. The bride had given up trying to fix things. She sat with her head slightly bowed, her hands folded in her lap, looking smaller than she had at the start of the evening. He stood near the kitchen entrance, holding an empty tray. His shift was almost over. In another hour, he could go home, take off this uniform, and forget about this terrible night. It was not his problem. These were strangers fighting their own battles. He had his own troubles to worry about. His rent was due next week. His mother needed new medication. His youngest sister had asked him for money to buy books for her final exams. He could not afford to lose this job over something foolish, but he could not stop looking at the bride. She reminded him of his sister, the middle one, who had always been the peacemaker in their family. Whenever their parents argued about money or stress, she would be the one to calm everyone down. She had a gentle heart, just like this young woman sitting in the middle of a war she did not start. It was not fair. Nobody deserved to have their happiness stolen like this. He looked at the piano again. It sat there in the corner, silent and patient. The light from the chandelier made its black surface glow softly. He had avoided looking at it for 3 years. He had trained himself to walk past it without feeling anything. But tonight, it was impossible to ignore. The piano was calling to him. He could almost hear it whispering his name, asking him why he had abandoned it, asking him if he still remembered how to make it sing. His heart started beating faster. A crazy thought entered his mind, and no matter how hard he tried, he could not push it away. What if he walked over to that piano right now? What if he sat down and played something beautiful? Would it change anything? Would it make these angry people stop fighting, even for a moment? Or would it just make things worse? He did not know. But the thought would not leave him alone. He remembered something his grandmother had told him a long time ago. She had said that music is a gift from above. It has the power to heal wounds that words cannot touch. It can bring strangers together and remind them of what truly matters. He had believed her when he was young. He had felt that power every time he sat at the piano. But somewhere along the way, he had forgotten. Life had beaten him down, and he had lost faith in the magic of music. The groom's father said something else, another insult wrapped in a polite tone. The bride's mother slammed her napkin on the table and stood up, saying she needed some air. Her husband grabbed her arm and whispered something urgent. She sat back down, but her face was red with anger. The other guests looked horrified. Some of them started whispering among themselves. The night was falling apart, and nobody knew how to stop it. He made his decision in that moment. He did not think about the consequences. He did not worry about what his manager would say. He simply set down his tray on the nearest table and started walking toward the piano. His legs felt strange, like they belonged to someone else. His hands were trembling slightly, but he kept walking. One step, then another, then another. The piano was getting closer. A few guests noticed him moving across the room. They looked confused. One woman nudged her husband and pointed. A waiter was walking toward the decorative piano. What was he doing? Had he lost his mind? The whispers started spreading like ripples in a pond, but he did not hear them. All he could hear was the sound of his own heartbeat and the echo of melodies he had not played in years. His manager saw him from across the room. The man's eyes went wide with panic. He started moving toward him, probably to stop him before he did something embarrassing. But he was too slow. By the time the manager reached the edge of the dining area, he had already arrived at the piano. He stood there for a moment, looking down at the keys. They were white and black, simple and perfect, just like he remembered. He had not touched a piano in 3 years. What if he had forgotten how to play? What if his fingers had lost their memory? He pulled out the bench and sat down. The room had gone completely quiet. Every single person was staring at him now. The bride had lifted her head, her tear-filled eyes wide with confusion. The groom looked equally puzzled. The feuding parents had temporarily forgotten their war, united in their surprise at this strange interruption. His manager stood frozen near a pillar, his mouth hanging open, too shocked to speak. He placed his hands on the keys. They felt cool and smooth under his fingertips. For a moment, he just sat there, feeling the familiar weight of the instrument beneath his palms. Memories flooded back to him. He remembered his grandmother's old keyboard. He remembered his first piano lesson. He remembered his mother crying with joy when he got the scholarship. He remembered the sound of applause after his performances at school. He remembered everything he had lost and everything he had tried to forget. His fingers began to move. The first note rang out, pure and clear, filling the silent room like a drop of light in darkness. Then came the second note, and the third. His hands remembered what his mind had tried to bury. The music was still there, living inside him, waiting for this moment. He did not choose a complicated piece. He chose something simple and beautiful, a melody that spoke of longing and hope. It was a piece he had learned when he was just a boy. Sitting at his grandmother's knee, dreaming of a future full of music, the room remained absolutely still. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The only sound was the piano, its voice rising and falling like gentle waves on a quiet shore. He closed his eyes and let the music carry him away. He was no longer a waiter in a fancy restaurant. He was no longer a man who had given up on his dreams. He was a musician again, doing what he was born to do. And for the first time in 3 years, he felt truly alive. He did not see the bride's reaction at first. He did not see the way her tears changed from sadness to something else. He did not see the groom squeeze her hand and smile. He did not see the guests leaning forward in their seats, captivated by the unexpected beauty filling the room. He did not see his manager lower his hand and stop trying to intervene. All he knew was the music, flowing through him like a river that had finally found its way to the sea. The first piece ended softly, the last note hanging in the air like a whispered prayer. He opened his eyes slowly, suddenly aware of where he was and what he had done. His heart was pounding. His hands were shaking. He had just interrupted a private event without permission. He had probably just destroyed his career. But strangely, he did not feel afraid. He felt free. He looked up and saw the bride staring at him. Her face was wet with tears, but she was smiling. It was a real smile, the first genuine smile he had seen from her all night. And in that moment, he knew that whatever happened next, this had been worth it. He had taken a chance. He had listened to his heart. And somehow, against all odds, the music had done what words could not. It had broken through the anger and the pain. It had reminded everyone in that room that there was still beauty in the world. But he was not finished yet. There was more music inside him, more to give. So he took a deep breath, placed his hands back on the keys, and began to play again. The second piece he played was different from the first. It started slow and gentle, like the first rays of sunlight touching the earth after a long, dark night. His fingers moved across the keys with a grace he had almost forgotten he possessed. The notes floated through the air, wrapping around every person in the room like a warm blanket on a cold evening. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. It was as if time itself had decided to pause and listen. He played with his eyes closed, letting the music guide him. He was no longer thinking about the restaurant or the angry families or his job. He was somewhere else entirely, a place where nothing existed except the melody pouring from his soul. He remembered playing like this when he was young. Back when the world was full of possibilities and dreams did not feel so far away. The piano had always been his sanctuary, the one place where he felt completely at peace. And now, after 3 long years of silence, he had finally come home. The bride watched him with wide eyes. The tears on her cheeks had dried, replaced by an expression of pure wonder. She had never heard anything so beautiful in her life. The music seemed to speak directly to her heart, saying all the things she had been too afraid to say out loud. It told her that everything would be okay. It told her that love was stronger than anger, that hope was more powerful than fear. She reached out and took her groom's hand, holding it tightly as the melody washed over them both. The groom looked at his bride and smiled. It was a real smile, not the forced one he had been wearing all evening. In that moment, he forgot about his parents and their endless demands. He forgot about the pressure to be perfect and the weight of expectations that had been crushing him for months. All he could see was the woman he loved sitting beside him, her face glowing in the soft light. He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. She turned to look at him, and something passed between them. A silent promise. A reminder of why they had chosen each other in the first place. The music continued to flow, and something remarkable began to happen. The bride's mother, who had been sitting stiff with anger just minutes before, felt her shoulders begin to relax. The melody reminded her of her own wedding day so many years ago. She had been young and hopeful, just like her daughter. She had believed that love could conquer anything. When had she become so bitter? When had she forgotten what truly mattered? A tear rolled down her cheek, but it was not a tear of anger. It was a tear of remembrance, of longing for simpler times. Across the table, groom's mother was experiencing something similar. The music had found its way through the walls she had built around her heart. She thought about her son, about the little boy who used to run into her arms every day after school. She had always wanted the best for him. But somewhere along the way, wanting the best had turned into controlling everything. She had been so focused on status and appearances that she had forgotten to ask her son what he actually wanted. She looked at him now, holding hands with his bride, and she saw something she had been too blind to notice before. She saw happiness. Real, genuine happiness. The two fathers sat in silence, their earlier hostility slowly melting away. The bride's father remembered a time when he and the groom's father had actually been friends. It was so long ago that he had almost forgotten. They had been young businessmen, full of ambition and dreams. They had made plans together, shared meals together, even laughed together. Then came the deal that went wrong, the money that was lost, the accusations that flew back and forth until their friendship crumbled to dust. He had carried that grudge for over 20 years, but now listening to this unexpected music, he wondered if it had been worth it. He had gained nothing from his anger except more anger. The groom's father was thinking the same thing. He looked across the table at his old friend turned enemy. They had wasted so many years fighting over something that no longer mattered. They had let their pride poison everything, including their children's happiness. What kind of men had they become? What kind of example had they set? He felt ashamed, truly ashamed. For the first time in as long as he could remember, he kept playing, unaware of the transformations happening around him. He had moved into a third piece now, something more hopeful and uplifting. The melody danced and soared, filling every corner of the room with its joyful sound. Some of the guests had tears in their eyes. Others were smiling softly, lost in their own memories and thoughts. The music had created a space where pretenses fell away, and hearts could be honest. One elderly woman near the back of the room closed her eyes and swayed gently to the rhythm. She was thinking about her late husband, who had passed away 2 winters ago. He had loved piano music. They used to dance together in their living room on quiet Sunday afternoons. She missed him terribly, but right now, listening to this beautiful performance, she felt close to him again. It was as if he was sitting right beside her, holding her hand like he used to. A young man at another table thought about his own dreams, the ones he had abandoned to follow a safer path. He had wanted to be a painter, but his family had convinced him to study business instead. He had a good job now, a nice apartment, a stable life, but he was not happy. He had not been happy in years. The music made him wonder if it was too late to try again. If maybe there was still time to chase the life he had always wanted. The restaurant manager stood near the wall, no longer thinking about rules or protocols. He had been ready to fire this waiter on the spot. But now, watching the effect the music was having on everyone in the room, he could not bring himself to be angry. There was something sacred happening here, something that went beyond business and propriety. He was witnessing a miracle, and he knew it. The fourth piece was the most emotional of all. It was a melody about loss and redemption, about falling down and finding the strength to rise again. He poured everything he had into it. All the pain of the past 3 years, all the loneliness, all the grief for the life he had lost, but also the hope that had never completely died. The belief that somehow, someday, things would get better. The notes rose and fell like waves on the ocean, carrying everyone in the room on a journey they would never forget. The bride's mother looked across the table at the groom's mother. Their eyes met for the first time all evening without hostility. There was something else there now, something softer. An understanding, perhaps. A recognition that they were not so different after all. They were both mothers who loved their children. They both wanted happiness for their families. They had let old wounds keep them apart. But maybe it was not too late to heal. The bride's mother did something that surprised everyone, including herself. She reached her hand across the table, palm open, an offering of peace. The groom's mother hesitated for only a moment. Then she reached out and took it. Their hands clasped together over the centerpiece of flowers, 2 women choosing forgiveness over grudges, unity over division. The bride saw this and let out a small gasp. Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks, but these were tears of joy, of disbelief, of overwhelming gratitude. He played the final notes of the piece, letting them linger in the air before fading into silence. Then he opened his eyes and lifted his hands from the keys. The room was completely still. For a moment, nobody moved, nobody breathed. The spell of the music still hung over everyone like morning mist over a quiet lake, and then the bride began to clap. Slowly at first, her hands coming together in soft, reverent applause. Her groom joined her. Then the guests at the nearest table, then more and more until the entire room was filled with the sound of clapping hands and grateful hearts. The waiter who had dared to play sat at the piano bench, overwhelmed by what had just happened. He had not expected this. He had not expected any of this. But the night was far from over, because in the crowd, someone was watching him very closely. Someone who recognized true talent when he heard it. And that someone was about to change his life forever. The applause seemed to go on forever. He sat at the piano bench, his hands resting on his lap, unable to move. His heart was racing, and his eyes were wet with tears he did not remember shedding. He had not planned any of this. He had simply followed an instinct, a feeling deep inside that told him the moment was right. And now, looking at the faces around him, he realized that something extraordinary had happened. The room that had been filled with anger and tension just minutes ago was now glowing with warmth and connection. The bride was the first to stand. She pushed back her chair and walked toward him, her blue dress flowing behind her like water. The guests watched in silence as she approached the piano. When she reached him, she did not say anything at first. She simply stood there, looking at him with eyes full of gratitude. Then she leaned forward and hugged him. It was a tight, genuine hug, the kind that says more than words ever could. He was startled at first, but then he hugged her back. He could feel her shoulders shaking slightly as she cried happy tears against his shoulder. "Thank you," she whispered. "You saved my night. You saved everything." He did not know what to say, so he just nodded and told her that he was glad he could help. She pulled back and smiled at him, really smiled. And in that moment he felt like all the sacrifices he had made in his life were worth it. If his music could bring this much joy to even one person, then maybe he had not lost everything after all. The groom came over next, shaking his hand firmly and thanking him with sincere words. Then came the guests, one by one, approaching the piano to express their appreciation. Some of them had tears in their eyes. Others simply patted him on the back or squeezed his arm. He was overwhelmed by their kindness. He was just a waiter. He was nobody special. But tonight, for a few precious minutes, he had been something more. The two mothers approached him together. They were still holding hands, a sight that would have seemed impossible just an hour ago. The bride's mother spoke first. She told him that his music had reminded her of what truly matters in life. She said she had been carrying anger for too long, and tonight she had finally found the strength to let it go. The groom's mother nodded in agreement. She apologized for the way she had behaved and promised to do better. Then she looked at her son and his bride and said that all she wanted was their happiness. The young couple embraced their mothers, and for a moment, the four of them stood together in a circle of forgiveness and love. The two fathers were slower to approach, but eventually they did. They shook hands with him and mumbled their thanks. But more importantly, they shook hands with each other. It was a small gesture, but it meant the world. 20 years of bitterness dissolved in a single evening by the power of music. He watched them exchange a few quiet words, and he knew that healing had begun. It would take time, but the first step had been taken. His manager finally approached, and he braced himself for the worst. He expected anger, maybe even termination on the spot, but instead, the manager just stood there, shaking his head in disbelief. "That was incredible," he said. "I've never seen anything like it in my entire career." He told him that he was not fired, that in fact he wanted to talk about giving him a raise. He also wanted to know why he had never mentioned that he could play like that. He just shrugged and said it never came up. As the crowd began to settle back into their seats, one man remained standing near the edge of the room. He was older, perhaps in his 60s, with silver hair and sharp, intelligent eyes. He wore an expensive suit, but carried himself with a casual confidence that suggested he did not need to impress anyone. He had been watching the entire performance with intense focus, and now he was walking directly toward the piano. The man introduced himself politely. He explained that he was a music producer who had spent 40 years in the industry. He had discovered many talented artists over the decades, some of whom had gone on to become famous around the world. But he said that raw talent like what he had just witnessed was rare. It was the kind of gift that came along once in a generation. He asked him directly where he had learned to play like that. He told the producer his story. He talked about his grandmother's old keyboard, his years of training, the scholarship he had earned, and the family emergency that had forced him to abandon his dreams. The producer listened without interrupting, nodding slowly as the pieces fell into place. When he finished, the producer reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card. He handed it to him and said 4 words that changed everything. "Call me on Monday." He stared at the card in his hand. It felt unreal, like something from a dream. He had given up on his music years ago. He had accepted that some dreams are not meant to come true. But here was a second chance, handed to him on a small piece of paper by a stranger who had seen something in him that he had forgotten existed. The rest of the night passed in a blur. The rehearsal dinner ended on a note of peace and reconciliation that nobody had expected. The bride hugged him one more time before leaving, telling him that he would always have a special place in her heart. The guests departed with smiles on their faces and warmth in their souls, and he went home that night carrying something he had not felt in 3 years. "Hope," he called the producer on Monday, just as he had been told. They met for coffee and talked for hours about music, about life, about second chances. The producer offered to help him record an album. He would cover all the costs and use his connections to get the music heard. In return, he asked for nothing except a share of whatever success might come. It was a fair deal, more than fair, and he accepted without hesitation. The months that followed were the busiest of his life. He worked at the restaurant during the day and recorded music at night. He poured everything he had into each track, every emotion, every memory, every dream he had ever held close to his heart. The producer was impressed by his dedication and his talent. He said that with the right exposure, he could become something truly special. The album was released 1 year after that fateful night at the Grand View. It was called Second Chances, and the cover featured a simple image of a grand piano in an empty room. The critics loved it. They called it honest, moving, and deeply human. Within weeks, it was climbing the charts. Within months, he was performing on stages he had only dreamed about as a boy. The world finally got to hear the music that had been locked inside him for so long. His father was there at his first major concert. He had recovered fully and traveled to the city with his mother and sisters to watch him perform. When he walked onto that stage and saw them sitting in the front row, tears streaming down their faces, he knew that every struggle had been worth it. He dedicated the concert to his grandmother, who had given him his first keyboard, and to his parents, who had believed in him even when he had stopped believing in himself. He never forgot the night that changed everything. He never forgot the bride whose tears had moved him to action, or the families whose feud had melted away under the spell of his music. Most of all, he never forgot the lesson he had learned. Dreams do not die. They wait. They hide in the corners of our hearts, patient and hopeful, till we find the courage to let them live again. And sometimes all it takes is one moment of bravery to turn a life around.